Every single member of the opposition has put their name to this motion, and it's an indictment that we need a young teenager, and I welcome Cara and her father. It's an indictment of the government and previous governments that 2 years after she addressed a committee, a joint Oireachtas committee, in the following manner, back in November 22, I am here to tell you what it's like to live with a family that has severely autistic children in it. And she goes on to say, they have been treated disgracefully, and I'm here and I am angry. And she's just one of the many campaigners on the ground. And I'm saying that on a day where the Taoiseach was an absolute disgrace and an embarrassment. An absolute disgrace and an embarrassment to stand up and know he's not complying with his legal obligations under an act that was passed 20 years ago. And rather than deal with that failure, he says, I'm going to change the law. And he actually says, I don't blame the High Court for their judgment. It was very nice of him. He doesn't blame the High Court for the judgment because they had to comply with the law, but I'm now going to change the law because I don't have to comply with it. And that Act, Ministers, was passed in 2005, and it was passed after the hardship and the hard work and the myriad of case law that led to that Act coming in. And when that Act came in, this was the guide. It sets out to make significant improvements in the everyday lives of people with disabilities in relation to buildings, employment, and then in relation to assessment of needs. Now, it wasn't radical enough to say it's an obligation to provide services, but there was an obligation to carry out an assessment of needs and also to lay out a service plan for the services required. 2 years later, we signed up to the UN protocol, and then it took us another 11 years to ratify it. And then in my time in the Dáil, I've looked at all of the reports, the capacity review that told us there was significant unmet need, then the cost of disability that we never brought in, and then an action plan that we failed to comply with. And in all of that, we have a young girl that has to sit outside in protest to alert us to what's going on. But she doesn't need to alert the opposition. For as long as we've been here, motion after motion, I have them in front of me, from the Sinn Féin, from the Social Democrats, from each and every one of us, we've stood up, we've implored and we've begged and we've said you've a legal obligation. But we know today that the Taoiseach doesn't put any value on a legal obligation. He's just going to change the law. And then we talk about private therapy. And how come we have so many private therapists? What has happened to our recruitment system that nobody wants to go into the public service? And what has happened to our ability to coax people back into the public service? Have we looked at, I worked as a psychologist years ago. I was absolutely considered a privilege to give 2 years back to the old Western Health Board. Has that been tried when we educate people on the public purse that they would give back and that we would provide housing? We have any amount of documents. We don't need another change in legislation except to hold the person accountable that has breached his law, breached the law. That's what we need legislation for if there's no penalty, and I haven't had a chance to check it. And we know from the census, every single year, the census that's carried out, the amount of vacancies, 817 vacancies on the 91 teams. How can any service be provided? And I'll finish by 2 other letters here, just very briefly to say the parents writing to us in desperation. We've spent 25,000 on private therapy and still to no avail. We have begged and implored in relation to the disability team in my own constituency, just outside Galway, no services available in the 21st century in a republic. Thank you, Chair.